Hey, welcome to episode 119 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast. We are recording on June the 6th, 2021. Take a moment for the veterans. It's D-Day. It allowed us the freedom to pontificate on preparedness without repercussions for now. Don't worry about C10, but find us on tour next week. My name is Eric, the host of the show, based in Southern Ontario. I'm a hunter, target shooter, ham radio operator, and computer geek. As a first responder, I witnessed an over-reliance on emergency services during major events. Started a small preparedness company to help people be able to look after themselves for at least 72 hours, if not longer.
I didn't put one Easter egg in there for you at all.
That was very nice of you.
No worries. My name is Ian. I live on Vancouver Island. I'm a student of preparedness, target shooter, and my farm's designated mediocre handyman.
I'm Scott, a frazzled new dad, paramedic splitting my time between Southern and Northern Ontario. I like to learn things, and I don't accept that things will always carry on the way they have just because I want them to.
And I'm Jeff. I'm based in Central Ontario. I'm a target shooter, soon-to-be ham radio operator, and general overall handyman. Want to help support the show and keep the Canadian Prepper Podcast on the air? Buy some swag. We have both the Canadian Prepper Podcast t-shirt. You want to model that there, Jeff? Yeah, there you go.
And the tactical...
People aren't going to buy it now.
Well, maybe they'll buy the tactical Velcro patch at prepperpodcast.ca. All proceeds help keep the lights on and the backup generator fueled.
And if you're enjoying the show, please take a few minutes to like us on Facebook and submit a review on iTunes. We also want your feedback, good or bad, or if there's just a topic you want us to cover. You can email us at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca.
All right, so we've got some mildly depressing content for you in this episode. We'll start off with some preparedness-related news articles. Then we'll let you know what we've done for our preparedness since our last episode. Then we're going to get into the main topic, discussing 1 second after. And it's not all that depressing. Okay, yes, it is.
I was going to say.
I just want people to continue listening.
It's like Angela's Ashes level of depressing, like that old movie there. But anyway,
let's move into the news. Speaking of depressing.
Speaking of depressing, so first we had the pipeline hack. Now we had the North America's largest meat producer get hacked. JBS Meats, according to Forbes.com, is now recovering after their hack, where they had 25% of the continent's beef production and 20% of their pork production offline for about a week. Again, we could file that under the fragility of the supply chain right now, whether it be electronically or pulse-wise or anything else. It just shows you how thin of a thread society hangs on when it comes to technology. So that was very interesting.
Yeah, it's wild how everything just comes to a grinding halt.
Well, I couldn't figure out what the big deal was at first because, the cows are still there and everything else. But then you start to realize that I was listening to Ice Age Farmer actually on one of his podcasts, and he was saying, well, the reason it's so hard is because as soon as the virus hits and they don't know how much feed to order, they have enough feed on hand at the feedlot to get those cows to slaughter date, and they're not anticipating feeding them after the slaughter date. Clearly, yeah. So once the cows have been sitting around for a couple of days, now there's no food. Now you're losing meat because they're actually losing weight. And then now you've got starvation issues, water supply issues, everything else, because now the next group of cows isn't even showing up and they have a different diet requirement because they're fed so fast, right? And it screws up the whole system. So once the power of the computers come back online, it's not just like an instant recovery either, because now they got this kind of backlog train. It's like derailing a train and all the cars kind of fall off. So it's pretty terrifying when you think about it.
Yeah, it's wild that a computer system could just take everything down now.
Yeah.
But it's the way things are.
And so in my conspiracy-minded head, I'm thinking this is retribution or something. I don't know. But
wait a minute. Not on a prepper podcast. Come on.
Yeah. And then NBC News reports the Iran's largest warship just miraculously caught on fire and sunk. All right. Just, it's not like they had firefighting teams on board or anything else. It just...
That'll happen.
Yeah. You would think that they'd want to protect their biggest asset in their Navy. But anyways, and also in strange news, Iran's largest refinery south of Tehran and a couple other refineries on the coast region all mysteriously caught fire. It's like we got to send Alan over there to do some consulting work or something and kind of get their firefighting up to snuff, because clearly there's a problem there. But I found the timing quite convenient. There seems to be like a cold, silent cyber war going on or
Yes.
something going on.
And
But,
then just random fires.
Yeah, I don't think fires like that happen randomly. And of course, we'll find out in about 30
Yeah.
years after they declassify everything. But
Oh yeah, of course. It was totally aliens, right?
Space laser, yeah.
yeah, space aliens for sure.
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah, the world's where the aliens come from.
that's right. But it's going to be a very interesting read when it does come up. So,
All right.
and that's all I had.
Cool. Well, I've got an article here just in regards to, and the headline is half of businesses have increased priority on disaster preparedness since the start of COVID-19. So nothing like a pandemic to start you into preparedness. But at least businesses are kind of starting to look at it now and go, oh, maybe we should have planned for stuff like this. So it's at least it's getting people to get into the preparedness mindset and start to get plans in place and start thinking about things for the future. So it's good to see. It's too bad it took a pandemic to do it, but
Well, like I say, the best time to start prepping was 10 years ago. The second best time is today.
when you're not in a pandemic, I suppose.
Well, even now, the supply chains are still relatively intact. So
Yeah, true. Yeah, fair enough.
If it means we're better off for whatever comes next, it's better for everyone.
exactly.
Bring back the murder hornets.
Oh. So I grabbed a quick article off CNBC, just again, kind of not really preparedness wise, but just that the chip shortage is starting to have major real world consequences. For anybody who hasn't been paying attention, there's quite a shortage of the chips. Well, it depends who you talk to. Some of them say there's quite the shortage. Other ones say that some countries that manufacture them are hoarding them. So I guess it depends which one you want to believe. But I mean, chips are in anything and everything you have nowadays, from TVs to computers. The biggest hit right now seems to be automotive. There's thousands of vehicles sitting in assembly parking lots waiting for chips. Word is that car dealers, some of them in the States, have days to weeks of inventory when they usually have at least a month or two. So there doesn't seem to be anything on the horizon that I could see that is going to end it. And I mean, with China having the vast majority of the chips, the more that basically the United States or any other countries attack them, the more they're probably going to hoard them. So stay tuned.
Well, I'd say it's very apropos because, I mean, what's EMP affect most is microchips, but also, strangely enough, there's a big fire in Taiwan at their big chip factory.
Wait a minute. Hold on.
Well, we really have to send Alan over there now.
Yeah, it's like, oh my goodness, it's just so well placed, these fires. It's amazing. So, the world's largest chip manufacturer caught fire and burned down about a month and a half ago in Taiwan. And the only other nation really that creates microchips is China, mainland China. Depends if you want to go with that one country debate right now. But anyway, it's just how convenient all these things coming into play at once. But
It's almost like it's planned.
Yeah.
Oh dear. This week's book topic had me thinking about other threats to the electrical grid. So an article that kind of jumped out on me was the sun sets off 4,000 sea mines during the Vietnam War. And scientists are only now discovering or sort of realizing how strong this 1972 solar storm was. Got me thinking about the Carrington Event, the Quebec power blackout back in 1989 that was caused by a solar flare. So just sort of going down this rabbit hole, reading Lloyd's of London back in 2013, estimated that event today would have cost between 600 billion and 2.6 trillion dollars worth of damage.
Wow.
They sort of talk about like telegraph lines catching fire and telegraph operators being shocked and, Radio Shacks literally burning down. The other interesting thing in reading about the Quebec incident, the Quebec blackouts, different forms of bedrock have different impacts on how those solar storms affect the power grid built above them. Canadian Shield being lots of granite that doesn't conduct electricity really well, all of that energy goes into the power lines, so it's a lot more susceptible than other types of like just limestone or sedimentary rock. So all of a sudden, it means we're in sort of potentially much worse shape because of it. So, while we're discussing EMPs, or the book's discussing EMPs today, the reality is, I think if Mother Nature decides to throw something at us on the scale of a Carrington Event issue, it was back in the mid 1800s, and basically you could see the aurora borealis were so bright they were visible down to the equator, and apparently you could read by them. They were so bright, just as an indicator of how strong a solar storm that was, and how much damage that would do to us today, as per Lloyd's of London, the insurers.
Well, and the smaller the electronics get, the smaller the, I guess, the circuits, and the more susceptible they are to lower voltages even. Doesn't have to be as high, so pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Sure is.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Shall we move into what we've done lately for preps?
Let's do it.
All right. So for myself, tore the chainsaw pretty much down as far as I could anyways. Cleaned it all up, and believe it or not, I put it back together and it runs again. So I was pretty happy with that. It needed a good cleanup and a good tune-up, and it was spewing bar oil all over the place and just not running very nicely at all. And we've got a fishing trip coming up out in the middle of nowhere where it's probably going to be useful to have. So figured I'd put my YouTube skills to use and watch a couple of 12-year-olds show me how to tear it apart and put it back together, and it worked.
It's a little emasculating when somebody has this stuff all figured out before their voice drops.
Yeah, but
yeah,
it worked.
I know.
And,
you know, stuff I've learned off just on electrical circuits off kids that are younger than my kids. It's terrifying.
I just assume the parents are in the background actually telling them what to do, so I feel a little bit better about it.
That's what you need to tell yourself.
Probably not.
The username has a chainsaw brand in it or something.
Yeah.
It's the Still family. What?
Yeah.
Yeah. As for myself, let's see here. I had to go to work. So I blatantly disregarded the do not travel advisories, went and did my thing, came back. Then I immediately went and did it again to move my daughter over. Moved her out of the house so she could go off to university. So, yeah, one less person in the house. Food supplies duration just went up by a quarter, I guess. On the bright side, I don't know.
Yeah.
Nothing like, hey, see you later. Thanks for leaving us stuff behind.
Yeah, but by the same token, though, I guess that makes my extraction and bug out plans a little more difficult. So you got to take the good with the bad, right?
Yeah, true. It's a balancing act.
Yeah. Anyway, so other than that, I just did some wood chopping as per normal, taking care of those big trees I took down last winter. Just the big branches that are just 30 feet long. I was just kind of chop sawing up those things. Got to experience a little first aid scare by having the chop saw explode on me after 20 years of hard use. Just came away with a couple bruises. That was it. And luckily I was wearing my eye protection, so that was good. Alan would be very proud of me.
Did you have a carbon monoxide detector nearby, though?
I did not.
Oh, he's going to be mad.
But I was wearing
he's going to be mad.
I mean, does sawdust create carbon monoxide? I don't know.
According to Alan, it does.
Everything does. It's show me on the doll where the carbon monoxide is, Alan. So, he'll get us. Next week.
Here we go.
Next week he'll get us.
Yep.
No, I didn't personally do this, but we did hatch out some baby chickens this week, so that was good. I mean, I wouldn't want to sit on the eggs for 3 weeks. That'd be boring. So we've got 5 already, and we're still hatching them out. So we'll see how many we get for this season's egg layers. Let's see here. There is an Easter egg there. Never mind. Did some prelim work on a homebrew ammo can, and I was trying to do a battery recharging station, so that's solar powered, and kind of putting it all together. So kind of trying to get one of those set up. So I'm just doing some ordering on AliExpress and everything else. And then other than that, I went to my good friend at Rapid Survival and ordered some Berkey replacement water filters.
Oh, look at that.
And that was it.
Cool. Jeff.
So I just rotated my fuel stock, got everything topped back up again. We organized my pantry, found some things that were just a tad little bit expired. So I'll move them to the front and get them taken care of, hopefully sooner than later before they're much longer expired. That's more or less been it for my week or 2 weeks, I guess.
Nice.
I've been reading a whole lot about Zeerpots. It's an old technology for cooling food preservation, where you have a clay pot surrounded by sand, surrounded by another clay pot. You pour a bunch of water into the sand and it can evaporate through the clay. We had a little bit of a discussion about this offline, but it sort of certainly falls under this old technology that I find fascinating, because it doesn't rely on batteries, doesn't rely on power, doesn't rely on anything that isn't readily available. So I have ambitions of trying some of these. I know we talked about how hard it is to find large pots, large clay pots, because now everything's made of plastic. But at the same time, in reading about them, sometimes going larger isn't necessarily better. You're better to have multiple small ones because you have more surface area that way, and it sort of keeps the smaller inner pot cool. But it's quite interesting.
Yeah, no, we were actually looking at those too, because I think it's about a 10 to 12 degree drop in temperature on the inside. And I used to see them being used down in Mexico quite a bit, obviously, because of the clay down there. They use clay pots all the time. But yeah, it's definitely a cool technology. It's quiet, doesn't require much other than a little bit of water. And if you have a swamp nearby, it's perfect, right?
Yeah, doesn't have to be drinkable water or anything. So
yeah.
Anyway, I like it. I've also been thinking about old cars. A friend of mine in high school had restored an old VW Beetle that he paid less for than the price of bologna by the pound. He worked at a grocery store at the time. That's how we measured things. But he chose it specifically because it was old enough to have zero electronics, which means that he could actually fix things. As soon as there's electronics, there's things you just can't fix. And that lesson's really stuck with me. And, I like things that you're able to actually fix on your own, should need be. So anyway, it's got me thinking.
It has nothing to do with the book, does it?
Admittedly, the book this week, and the fact that all of these books seem to have someone with a really old car, may have been part of that thought process. Not going to deny it.
You want to be that guy. It's actually one of my neighbors back in Ontario actually had one of those VW Beetles, the OG version. And you're right, because even the windshield washer fluid motor that would normally be electronic and solenoid driven and stuff, it actually used compressed air off the spare tire to power the windshield washer fluid dispenser.
Yeah,
it's super old school technology. I was like, well, eventually your spare tire is going to go flat. He goes, yeah, but just in the old days when they used to go to the filling station, they fill up the gas and fill up the air in all the tires, including the spare, and that's how they do it. I was like, well, that's actually kind of smart.
Yeah,
there we go. So yeah, it was definitely a good idea with the little VW bugs for sure. I mean, not exactly a cargo machine, but it works.
I like it.
Yeah, good.
All right. Shall we move into the main topic, as depressing as it may be?
I was the one that suggested this book. You're welcome, and I'm sorry. I've read it before. It terrified me then. Having rereading it, I'm absolutely every bit as terrified.
It is terrifying.
It really is. Very rarely does the forward or afterward of a book add much value as far as I'm concerned. In this case, I honestly think they're really important pieces, and I encourage you to read them if you haven't. Specifically where they talk about the author, William Forstchen. He wrote this as a cautionary tale about how incredibly ill-prepared we are in the face of this threat. And when you kind of consider that piece, there's so many details that he included as to just explore different areas of modern life that would be impacted by a cataclysmic event, this threat or otherwise. And when you look at the similarities between this book, one second after, and 77 Days in September that we talked about a few months back, it's not a coincidence that there's all kinds of similarities, because they're both based on the same report to Congress on the threat of EMP attack. I made a point of reading that. It's a little less exciting, but still troubling, as it identifies all sorts of areas of our society that are at risk, that are completely interconnected and interdependent. When we talk about all the supply chain stuff we were talking about a couple of minutes ago, all of this stuff is all interrelated. So, spoiler alert, the book is about EMP. The story follows John Matherson, a retired Army colonel who moved to the small North Carolina town his wife was from while she was succumbing to cancer. He teaches history at the local college, looks after their 2 daughters with help from his mother-in-law. There's the initial power outage that doesn't rattle them much. It's a blackout. These things happen until they realize all the cars on the freeway have stopped and there's no planes in the sky. So John's background as a military historian gives him a head start in realizing it was an EMP. He presents an old paper he'd written on asymmetric warfare to the mayor, and as a result, he kind of ends up sitting on the council that helps steer the town through all the various crises. So Forstchen really puts a lot of energy into crafting all sorts of issues into the storyline. The rush on the banks and stores, the stranded refugees, the need for medicines, the lack of food in our just-in-time society, medical care, looters, violence, martial law, food rationing, infection and antibiotics, rebuilding with old technology, like from the old telephone switchboard they find to antique cars. The other neighboring towns try to impose their will, either by taking resources or ordering the town at the center of the story to accept refugees. The dwindling resources from cigarettes to medicine to food. The building of a local militia and the eventual confrontation with the roving posse of evildoers. And I mean, it's all, when you take it in the context of him writing it as a cautionary tale, you can see so much detail is carefully put in there to make you think about all of these things. And I mean, in our sort of pre-show discussions about it, we were sort of saying every time you read it, you pick out more things that you hadn't thought about, the previous time, just because there's so much detail in there.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating. Just to boil it down, I guess the book is about all the changes in society that would happen and have happened since it was last an issue. And I think you just nailed it all out there in that one paragraph there about all the things that would have to be thought of and everything else. And because it's a cautionary tale, he doesn't focus on the prepper porn standard of the tactical, gunfight aspect where, Buddy let loose with a 30 round mag from his, H&K 416 and all those other stuff. No, it's actually just says, okay, well, the battle's over. It went well. But let's focus on the more thing, which is triage and stuff like that. And so as far as laying out societal issues that would come up, and there'd be plenty of them. Awesome book for that, right?
Oh yeah, sure was.
Yeah. So I guess the when it starts off, the first thing that he really covers is just society's general lack of EMP knowledge, because everybody's standing around going, "Oh well, my smartphone is black. That's weird," and the power's out. But oh well, it'll come back on in a couple hours. I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah, and so will my phone. My phone will come back, no problem. Yeah,
I just need to charge it.
Yeah, they don't tie in the fact that that the chances of those two both dying at the same time is pretty much nil. But yeah, that's this kind of cognitive dissonance or continuation bias or whatever, and they just carry on until he's actually starting to say, "Hey, hello, McFly, this is obviously not normal." And of course, the problem is that this book does cover in a roundabout way is that there's a lack of news. Nobody knows what's going on because, nobody can communicate because our communication system requires microchips.
Yep. And what I seen was the fact that even, when this happened and he knew it was an EMP, everybody else is like, well, the power, like you guys said, the power will come back in a couple hours. Okay, but that doesn't explain why all of the cars on the freeway just suddenly stopped.
Yep.
The power grid isn't going to make your cars stop. So.
Yeah, but again, people's general lack of technical knowledge, like myself included. There's huge gaps in my preps as far as technical knowledge, and yet the average person has even less, which terrifies me. But the fact they wouldn't tie the two together and figure that's not normal. They're just like, oh, okay, well, I just ran out of gas at the same time. These things happen, I guess. It's a bad day. Well, so did everybody else, but oh well.
Common sense is not very common.
No, and they're just sitting there milling around on the highway, and you realize that that's exactly what they would do because they'd be waiting for this help to come, wait for the cell phone to come back so they can make a phone call, somebody to offer them a ride. So people just sat.
Yeah.
And I was like, huh.
Yeah, because they're not thinking about, if something like this were to happen, what would I do? Because every day it's just I go from A to B, I do A, B, C, D. It's a fairly structured type of life, and then all of a sudden something throws a curveball into it, and people just don't think, right? So it's interesting that they just sit on the freeway, wait for someone to come and help.
But by the same token, though, some guys didn't wait for 9 meals to go to the anarchy stage. Like already, people start trying to edge towards Buddy's car when he first starts out, and eyeing up the ladies and everything else. And people are sitting around waiting for the military to come in to aid them. And like when a tsunami hits Indonesia and a carrier shows up to offer aid, that's one thing. Or like Scott goes down to Haiti to offer aid. But when an entire continent is out, like do people honestly believe the military can just show up with enough MREs to feed the population for the next year? They do, I think.
Anybody listening to this podcast, probably not, but anybody not listening, probably.
And that's the thing, FEMA or whatever organization, it's all about moving resources to where they're needed. But if they're needed everywhere,
they're not unlimited resources.
Yeah.
Right. So
well, I think they actually said they had stockpiled like 60 something million meals. That means that 1/5 of all Americans would get one meal. And that's assuming that you could get them all to those people with no transportation because everything's shut down truck wise. So it's pretty crazy that way. Like 60 million MREs sounds cool if you're like a 30,000 man army or something, but anyway.
And on top of that, everybody with access to those MREs is also without power and food. Is it all going to get distributed?
Nope.
Probably not.
No, I'm sitting on a pile of MREs. Sweet.
Look at that. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. The other thing I just want to talk on briefly too is the interim leadership that John Matheson became part of versus the political leadership. So you've got the town's emergency coordinator, and you've got the mayor and the sheriff and random history professor showing up. And do you really want the person that's used to cutting ribbons and attending like parades and stuff like that? Do you really want them in charge of something like this? Or do you want the emergency guy that's strictly worried about keeping everybody the same, or do you want the guy that actually has some historical knowledge? And so it becomes almost like a leadership struggle for who's the best man for the ongoing crisis at the time.
Yep.
And that's huge. Like, imagine if you were the mayor of the town and you didn't want to give up the reins of power, but you didn't know what you were doing, and the hilarity that would ensue afterwards, right?
Yeah, we see that often enough in crises.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's sad.
Alone a major one like that.
And who would you want in charge at that point, right? Like, would you want the sheriff to just be like, shoot looters and keep shooting until the people settle down? Like, well, maybe not. There's
got to be a fine balance somewhere.
People down, right?
Yeah, that's how that works. No.
Actually, the book covered that well, because like they were like, okay, so we've got a couple of guys that were clearly looting and murdering.
Yep.
Let's put them in jail. No, well, let's see what the jury wants to do, and they sentence them to death. Now they're kind of sitting there navel gazing. Who's going to shoot them? Oh, well, we can't have you do it. We can't have you do it. So I guess you're voluntold. And that was different as well, because I mean, the person that wants to do that job, you probably don't want doing that job.
No, definitely not. Yeah. So,
yeah, that's a really tough, like, in societal changes. Like I said, that's the ongoing theme with this book is just the normal does not work in a situation like this.
No, and they go, like, for that example too, they go to the extreme of where those guys were looting and stealing and stuff. They go to the extreme of death sentence. In regular times you would never see that, right? But
we had the death sentence up until 1967 in Canada, and I mean, I still think a lot of Canadians are in favor of it. Won't speak for anybody, but anyway. But I'm just saying, it's the fact is that like when you have limited resources and you can only feed X amount of people.
Yep.
What would be the point of keeping these people in prison that have already murdered? And that becomes that ethical, legal, everything dilemma, like ongoing constitution dilemma and everything else. Like, at what point do you say, well, they're not worth the food they're eating anymore? And who has to make that call? Who has to enforce it? That's a huge change for a small community to go through.
Yeah. That section of the book really had me thinking, because I never really thought about that before with society going through a situation like that. All of a sudden, things are a lot worse than what they are now. If you're stealing food from people and you're breaking into places and doing all that, it's a lot that's a lot harsher, I guess, is the best way to put it. It's
Well, I also like that that Forstchen, he's a historian. That's his background. So all of this stuff is put in the context of what has happened historically during, the siege of Leningrad is referenced a whole bunch of times in the book, and all sorts of other historical, factual examples that sort of can be transposed onto North American society. And what are we going to do with? Here's the problem. What solution have people come up with historically?
Yeah, and I mean, cannibalism is touched on. It's just not something anybody wants to talk about or admit to. But I mean, it's not something that's unheard of in the 20th century. Even it was done in various countries, including Leningrad. But there was also a point where people's kids had died, and they said, "Well, I can't eat my own kid, but I can eat my neighbor's kid, and they can eat my kid, and we'll just do tradesies." And it's horrible, like just stuff that you would never even fathom in your brain right now. But yeah, as a history professor, there is actually a Montreat College, and he actually did teach there, I believe. If you read the afterwards, I think it's in there.
Well, and it's kind of neat if you look at just Google Maps of Black Mountain, North Carolina, you can actually see where the interstate goes through, and all of this stuff. Like he obviously wrote what he knew, because it's describing very real places, and how a strategically strong bottleneck point for defense, and so it's well written that way.
Well, and water supplies, like he touches on that with the neighboring community, and I guess you guys have water towers that get water pumped up to them and then distributed. But same thing here, we have watersheds that feed certain towns that other people have control of, and everything else, and that could certainly come into play as well. And actually, the forward, I think it was, that covers the congressional report. They talk about the 90% die off within a year, and a couple other things. But the whole point is they haven't really done tests on this since the late 80s was the last one. And they did Starfish Prime back in the 60s, which was an accidental discovery. And then they did another one where they had a bunch of random cars in the 80s lined up in a parking lot, and they basically did a test. And not all of them were affected. And they are like, well, we're not 100% sure how this is going to go, but this is how we think it's going to go. And so nobody actually knows like how bad this could be. And I think, like we were mentioning before, is that the smaller these circuits get, the more susceptible they are to even lower voltages, let alone EMP voltages, which are in the 50,000 volt range or higher. So yeah, this could actually be a lot worse than he's making it out to be in the book.
Well, and I mean, it's very interesting because when you look at some of the small electronics that are more sensitive, but also whether your Apple Watch has enough surface area sort of antenna-wise to accumulate that voltage versus something that's plugged into a 30-mile long power line, it's hard to say. And you're right. We really don't know. We know there's a theoretical risk, but we have no idea how good or bad it can be. And I mean, just talking about asymmetric warfare, whether the threat, if it were a cyber attack that did actual physical damage to the power grid, a solar flare that did damage to the power grid, sure, great that your house parts may be affected, may not be affected. But then all of a sudden there'll be all sorts of other problems. Like the ease that they found gasoline because no one's cars were running in the book really struck me as like, okay, they're getting off too easy.
Well, until the gasoline's no good after 6 months, but I mean,
well, that too. But let's say the power grid goes down, so everyone's cars are still working as long as you can get gas into them, and we're all going to run out of gas really quickly. And it's still going to be the same disruptions to the food, food distribution systems, medicine.
Yeah. But you mentioned asymmetrical warfare. I mean, from a cost, benefit analysis perspective, if you're some small nation and you got a bone to pick with somebody, I mean, instead of building carriers and submarines and amassing armies and training them, you just get one old Scud missile with a crappy old Ukrainian nuke from the mid '60s, and you've got her taken care of. Like, and it's cheap relatively.
Allegedly.
Yeah, not that nukes can be bought at 7-Eleven like Marty McFly style, but yeah, like seriously, I mean, if you're a rogue state or a rogue power of some sort, doesn't have to be a state, and you want to like kick somebody in the nards hard from a asymmetrical warfare perspective, you can't think of a better way to do it. For the sake of bribing a few big brains on how to load up a rocket like that, it wouldn't be that difficult, I wouldn't think. But not that I've tried it often, but. But anyways, yeah, it's actually it's fascinating when you think about the simplicity of it, how you could bring a major power like the States or any other major power to their knees by doing this. And I'm sure the next kinetic war, there'll be some level of this happening because why not?
Well, I mean, honestly, whether it's an EMP or just a plain old cyber attack, like I think the threat to our very old electrical grid system is pretty profound.
Yeah, it's scary when you think about it.
Yeah, and whether it were an EMP or the grid being crippled by any of the other threats to it, realistically, that 90% die-off is probably an accurate number. Doesn't matter what the causative event is, without electricity, we're in a lot of trouble.
Yep.
Well, yeah, the die-off, they're becoming in waves, which I guess we can talk about right off the bat too, is you got the immediate die-off, which is going to be like the pacemakers, people on life support, people in airplanes and cars that are going way too fast for their own good and, lose control. Then you have the next waves where you get the medically delayed people, and then the inevitable starvation after the food runs out, cold winters on the prairies. Yeah, 90% seems kind of low when you think about it. But
well, and one of the things they touched on is, our society is capable of feeding this many people based on technology, and if you take that technology away, our society won't be able to feed this many people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and people going to that 9 meals to anarchy thing, I mean, the people that were, stuck passing through on the highway there, I mean, they're in such dire straits. You think you're bad sitting at home when something like this happens. So if you're in the middle of the road and all you have is what's in your car, it's not going to take 9 meals to get to the point where you're getting desperate, right? So
it's true.
I think the inevitable crime wave would be sped up exponentially out of fear, desperation, whatever you want to call it. But man, oh man, what a cavalcade of bad events happening all at once.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
I just want to touch on that quickly too. Is like we talked about the guys in the town council and stuff. I did kind of giggle about that one thing where the guy, was the sheriff or somebody? Somebody was the avid golfer, and basically he didn't like the idea of turning the local golf course into a graveyard. And I was like, well, what do you expect? People are going to carry a body 3 miles out of town to the local graveyard, or they can walk across the street and conserve calories and get it done there. But just that he still had in his brain that things are going to get back to normal long enough that he could play golf. I was like, not happening. Anyway.
No, but it's a perfect example of that cognitive dissonance that you've talked about, and that all of the personal biases that we bring into everything. Whatever it is, whether you're voting, whether you're picking something at the store, it's your personal biases that are directing those choices. So, be it a love of golf or, some of the other issues, touched on in the book, like, if you're a dog lover or if they're a protein source,
yeah.
Well, he also touches on the fact that they're great biological alarms. It did its job for him. By the same token, it turned out to be a single-use biological alarm because it got shot during the break-in.
Yep.
So, a good solid case for having more than one dog. And, I realized that something could happen to them by them doing their job.
Yep.
And then they turn into a food source. So,
true.
Yeah, horrible stuff. And speaking of food, actually, I was going to mention there the concept of societal changes there, the concept of personal property versus, the state notices you have a big pile of food. All these people are hungry. We would like your food.
Yep.
And that becomes the issue. Like, do you want to help everybody for 2 meals or do you want to help your family for a year? It's tough calls all around, right? Does the state have the power to do that?
Refer to our last episode, Hiding in Plain Sight.
Yeah.
In this book, they talk about the Franklin clan. There are 2 more books in the series, which I've had the pleasure of enjoying, and they actually sort of introduce them sort of more into the main storyline. And they're fairly hardcore preppers that have thought about these things before. And, from my perspective, maybe the heroes of the story, but, it's it's very interesting, and sort of how to negotiate their interactions.
Well, yeah, I mean, the fact is that I think they came up with a decent solution. Is like, if you're going to ask for food handouts, you have to allow for an inspection in your house, because if you're asking for handouts, you're clearly out, right? So,
Yep.
you have to offer up whatever you have in order to put it in the kitty, so you can get your daily meal ration ticket or whatever. And I think it's a decent
Although
compromise.
there are people who would take the handout and still have something hidden back for later, and so I kind of looked at that and went, yeah, I can kind of see that. If you want the card, you allow us to see what you've got hidden.
Yeah, and that's fair. Like I said, that was a good workaround versus just saying, well, whatever you have, we're just taking, whether or not you like it. But they could opt out. They could say, well, you're not getting ration cards if you have your own food, do your thing, right?
Yep.
And I think that's a good compromise. Same thing with the cars, though. There was that immediate issue with the like, hey, your car's running, we need it because we're we're the authority figure. He's like, no,
nope.
But eventually it came around. Like they figured out some workarounds for it. But I mean, into that panic, right? Like the oh my goodness, like how am I supposed to do my job without my Taurus or whatever the police car is? It turned into a fast panic.
Yeah, I found that was interesting too.
I like that one. That was the good cop, bad cop one part of it.
Yep,
it's kind of funny.
That was good. Yeah.
Personalities about changes in society there too. So we a bunch of people kind of come out of the woodwork, didn't we?
Oh yeah.
So the burglars, looters, whatever you want to call them, they're bound to happen. So speaking of biological alarms, we got a bear in the neighborhood right now. So and we got
his job.
He's doing his job. So we got the marauders, we got the prophets. They touched on that a few times. People take the emergency and say, hey, the world is ending. Listen to what I say. I've got some great ideas. Follow me. Yeah, and you can see that happening, and people not knowing what else to do. They're like, okay, tell me what to do, because like that's what I'm used to doing. So, and before you know it, you've got like gangs of people that are like following what they believe is their one true savior, and doing all sorts of crazy things they would never normally do.
Yep.
This whole book, I'm just like, yeah, he's not wrong, and that would happen.
It certainly would.
Yeah.
Nope, it's freaky.
Well, and we talked about the mental game too, like back in was it I guess mental health and preparedness, I think it was that episode. And people who give up. So after a while, some of the people started refusing food because they wanted to, give it to the people that are actually contributing to society, or just, trying to just put on a brave face because they're old and they're going to die anyway. And so people start refusing food, get into depression. The suicide rate goes through the roof because there's just no hope on the horizon. And it's kind of the opposite of marauders who are doing everything to stay alive, right?
Yep.
And Darren made a good comment. I don't know if you guys seen that in the live chat there. We talked about where a quarter of the population was on antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication, and they're running out now. Expect a whole lot of insanity.
And again, depending on how many supplies people have on hand, some people go week to week. Some people are smart, maybe have a month's worth, but after no more than a month, I would say you're gonna have a lot of loonies, like clucking like a chicken as they walk down the road, talking to the walls, and unstable and unpredictable behavior at best, right?
And they're the dangerous people.
Yep.
Well, and again, sometimes it's not their fault. I mean, like, I do believe there was a large institution in Aurelia where they let loose a bunch of them after the government cutbacks closed it down, and they just kind of let them loose on society. And luckily, they're still medicated, but that they're there and they're currently medicated. What happens when they're not?
Yeah.
So
and all kinds of other medication too. We saw that in the book with the insulin, right? That's going to disappear as well, and you can't keep it cold if you don't have a fridge. So it's
even with a Zyrpot, you wouldn't be able to keep it very long. That's for sure.
No, sadly not.
No, and again, it boils down to they come back to the insulin thing later on, in the simple fact that supply chain comes into play. It's like, I've got X amount of insulin, I've got so many mild diabetics I can keep alive for 5 years, or I can keep your daughter alive for another month and she's already on the way out. So what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
Harsh but fair.
It's triage, and triage isn't always pretty, right?
The concept of triage, we talked just talk about that quickly too. Like we talked about trying to keep the workers that are actually like doing the soldiering, the digging, and all this other stuff. People could earn extra rations by doing hard labor, but by the same token, it's a losing game no matter what. The rations they were given out weren't enough to offset the calories they're burning.
Yep.
But they did triage, and people that weren't doing much weren't getting high rations and got put on half or quarter rations after a while.
And it was kind of the same thing after the big battle where that guy's girlfriend was going around and putting a number on everybody's forehead, a 1, 2, or a 3. Just basically, yeah, you're a 3, you're still alive, but we're not going to help you because you're not going to survive. And kind of the same thing.
Why give somebody limited pain meds when they're going to die anyway? Or you can, give it to the person that may live through it if you get immediate care. And there are people with a cut thingy, can wait till everybody else is taken care of first, right? And they don't
wait till the power comes back on.
Yeah. I mean, cut thingies do come into play during the book, but by the same time, they're like, if you have a battle scar of some sort, you may die from it, but you're not going to die right away. So you have to get less of a priority. Yep. But harsh.
Yep, but necessary.
Admittedly, those triage tags are just color-coded ones in real life.
Actually, I was going to ask, but yeah. But when you think about it, they have to triage now, like in normal times, like, whether it be Hurricane Katrina or whatever, like, pick your disaster, like your earthquakes or whatever. Can you imagine if, you only have like 6 pain pills left for the community? Like, who gets them and why? So I would need them clearly. But
clearly they go.
I got a cut fingy, so
hangnail. Yeah, you need one.
hangnail. Get off my back, man. So the one thing I didn't agree with the whole book, that towards the end, it was they talked about they hinted at the rebuild time, because of course, as I've read the second book, I haven't read the third yet, but when I read the second book, it just seemed that the rebuild time was awfully convenient. They did kind of do it in stages, saying the coastal towns are back on order or back online, and they're slowly working their way towards Black Mountain, yes. And it just seems that it was at 9 months, or was it? I think it was 9 months they were back in the military. So I honestly think it would take longer than that, because you're assuming that the people that made the microchips didn't do this, and so you're assuming that they're going to provide you with microchips and supplies and maybe help, and they won't try and just take some land in exchange for that help. I think the rebuild time would be a lot longer than people actually want to let themselves believe. It's not going to be a year.
Yeah, well, I mentioned it. I mentioned it in my notes. I mean, just for the power grid itself. I mean, coming out of the power plants are the huge step-up transformers, so they can send the power down long distances. They call them basically large transformers, and they're only made in a few countries, and they're a minimum of an 18-month right now. Today, they're an 18-month order that you'll get delivery. So you're right. I mean, to say we're going to get all this up and running in 9 months when we've got to start from scratch, I'm afraid that's not reality.
No.
Well, yeah, I think it's Siemens in Germany makes them, a couple in China, and then I think one other place too. But yeah, and that's assuming normal order load, right? Like, we need like one. I think they only have 1 or 2 spares, and each transformer has specific specs. You can't just take like one spare transformer from Philadelphia and put it over in LA, because it's completely different requirements, right? For resistance level, voltages, everything else. So they're custom orders for each single one. And so you can imagine they need a couple thousand at once. Like that, this is not going to happen. It's a 5 to 10 year replacement. So,
I mean, you have to rebuild the entire system from scratch.
Well, hopefully just use more chips and make it more electronic.
And that too is taking into account that the countries that make them, like Germany and whatever, didn't get half wiped out either. So,
Well, yeah, because if it's all Western powers or all Eastern powers or wherever, like, a group of people get taken out, they might have to happen to be the manufacturing hub. Then what? Yeah,
exactly.
Slow degradation worldwide at that point. And then the last thing I just want to touch on before I hand it over to you guys was the 20% factor. So military rolls in at the end of the book and says, "Hey, how many people you got left?" He's like, "Well, geez, 20%. We got devastated." He goes, "That's actually pretty good." And that kind of hit me too. And especially the first time I read it, the fact that, cities would be much worse off. They figured there's 20,000 people left in all of New York. And they were saying that, people in the country sitting on stacks of corn did better. I mean, obviously population density kills. I get that. But 20%, like, can you imagine this devastation to your society and being told you did a good job? I just was like, yeah. So, and then I did kind of touch on it about 2 minutes ago, but if you get aid from a foreign country, what's going to be attached to, like, what strings are going to be attached to that foreign help? Are they going to say, well, we're going to seize your port in Seattle, but we're going to offer aid in exchange for it? Or are we going to just put a bunch of troops there to maintain law and order and just not remove them? And that's going to lead to bigger problems down the road, political and otherwise. So,
well, I mean, you see it now with different, sort of aid organizations going into countries in Africa and building infrastructure. And yeah, what are the strings attached to that?
Oh yeah, because right now I think certain countries of, communist origin on Eastern Asian peninsulas and stuff are actually offering like building ports in exchange for they'll like lend them money to do it. And if they miss a payment, they seize the port and say, well, we own it for the next 99 years. That's happening in normal times. So yeah, that's bad. But anyways, that's all I had to say about the book for the most part. Eric, what you got?
It certainly made me think. It's like everybody else has said, just looking at the scenarios they put forward and everything that kind of goes down throughout the book, and then reflecting on what would happen in reality. I think it's pretty bang on as far as how people would react, how things would kind of go down. I found it interesting with how the different towns were even kind of pitted against each other. So you had outsiders trying to get in, and we were even seeing not similar, but kind of a similar kind of stuff even with COVID going on right now, where, heaven forbid somebody from one town go to the other town, and now those people are complaining about outsiders being in their town and walking around. And so that was kind of interesting, where there's kind of setting up security and looking out for outsiders coming in. I think that would certainly be happening if this kind of situation happened in real life. And then it just drives home the fact of how reliant we are on electronics and electricity. It's probably something that everybody looks at early into getting into the preparedness world, that EMP is a possible thing and how reliant we are on electricity. But reading the book just scared the bejeebas out of me because it just, it just makes you go, whoa, like and how quickly it happens, just literally 1 second after. It's all of a sudden everything's done, and now what?
And it makes you wake up and realize the absolute and I mean, Eric, from your emergency service experience and mine, is the second the power goes out, everybody's on the phone. Well, when is my power coming back? When's my power coming back? I don't think a lot of people actually realize how absolutely reliant they are on electricity. And a couple hours here, a couple hours there, they're not going to bat an eye, but all of a sudden it becomes 1 day, 2 days, 2 months, 6 months. They're done.
A couple was it day 2.5 into the power outage a couple years ago here, and the guy on the radio station was literally losing his mind live on the radio, the DJ, and he was like, they got a boil water advisory in effect. How could these bastards do it? Like, how do they expect me to boil water in my apartment? I was like, oh, I see.
You're
Yes,
angry.
you don't have a Coleman stove then, do you?
Or barbecue,
barbecue or something. I kind of laughed because that was only 2 days in. And but the good news about this thing is there's been no phone calls about the power outage complaining, because nobody will be able to make phone calls. So.
That's true. Yeah.
That's something, I guess.
Silver lining?
Yeah. So
Yeah. Ian, always the positive one.
That's I'm the positive guy. You know that.
But yeah, no, the whole book just had me kind of step back for a second and kind of rethink a few things, kind of put a few things higher up on the priority list, and even just looking at the dynamics of how everybody organized themselves and how different people took on different roles. And we discussed it already about, having the mayor who's used to kissing babies and cutting ribbons, all of a sudden having to step in and make some serious decisions and such. Just, it really makes you think about who's going to be in that position and who's going to be making the calls and the power struggle that's going to come out of it. And it's just, it's a good book that makes you think. Yeah, it's depressing, but everybody thinks when the power goes out, it'll be back shortly. Not in this scenario.
Yeah.
Nope.
So it's a good read.
From my end of it, I mean, the book was, as Eric said, quite an eye opener. Yes, it was concentrating around EMPs, but I think the greater threat is literally just the grid itself. It's aging. It's in need of serious overhaul. It's not hardened in any way, shape, or form. Like I said earlier, those large transformers are an 18-month turnaround now. And again, let alone other people need them. That country's been wiped out like yours, whatever. And, one of my other big concerns, just like Colonial, is the cyber attacks on the grid. a lot of these large transformers have remote monitoring or Wi-Fi. Who makes the Wi-Fi? China. Well, if they build it, they can hack it. So,
Yep.
also
they'd
a
be
bit
good.
reading through the book, I kind of caught going through it a second time what I thought were some missed opportunities actually for some quick betterment. You know, they talked about, well, we need electricity. They've got that reservoir up there. Let's make a water wheel generator or something, and it just kind of went away. Why didn't they follow up on that? Why did it's not that hard to do? I mean, you need to, find a way to get water from point A to point B. Well, every house has eave trough on it. You rip the eave trough off, you put them all together, and you've got hundreds or thousands of feet of a way to get water from point A to point B. And, you find an old car that's rotted out, but parts on it are still good. You use a generator with a manual voltage regulator, so you're not burning out batteries. You got all those batteries in those cars sitting beside the road. It's not that hard to make up a battery bank.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the other thing that's been discussed is, don't rely on the government, aka the military, to help. I think especially if you're in a rural area, they'll be concentrating on the urban areas where, there's less geography, but much more dense people, where as opposed to having a humongous geographic area with limited population. So,
see, I'm hoping that instead of just like saying, well, there's more voters in cities, so let's try and protect them first. I would hope, in reality, somebody would put their fist down and say, no, let's concentrate on the people that can actually make more food and keep them fed. But you're right, they're probably going to focus on the urban area because of the geographical part. But
Ian, you said common sense. Smart
I
enough.
know common sense and government don't mix. I get it. We have a whole other podcast about that.
Yeah.
I mean, just to talk to your point, Jeff, about the fragility of the whole electric infrastructure. First time I read this, one of the other books I read at the time was called Lights Out by Tom Brokaw, like the U.S. journalist. And it was just a journalistic exploration of the fragility of the system. And it's utterly terrifying. Like, it really, really is.
Well, we had a news article from 2-3 episodes ago where we talked about even they're advertising it right now, saying like our grid is so old in California that basically you can expect West Coast power outages for the whole summer because we're just going to manually turn it off because the resistance level on these lines are so high they're just going to catch fire. So because of the increasing population, we can't run them. So too bad. And that's without any hacks or EMP or anything. It's just normal ops.
No hacks that we've been told about.
Yeah, that's true. But if they're predicting hacks that far out, that's pretty impressive too. So, but it's just, it's a really old grid. I mean, they haven't really been keeping up with it. They've been spending taxpayer money on random other stuff like, cutting ribbons or cutting babies and kissing ribbons or something like that. I think you said.
Cutting ribbons, kissing babies. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, you look at Texas and, 2-3 months ago when they had their massive blackout because the system just couldn't handle it.
And nothing was winterized because it didn't cost money.
Yeah, and people died as a result.
Mm-hmm.
The book certainly made me think about my gaps in preps. I think all of us, being a prepper is a bit of a journey. I don't think you ever actually get there. We don't know when the test is coming, but it made me think that, probably having some extra shoes would be a good idea. Look at thoughts about vehicles. The bit about how all of a sudden distances were measured in walking because, that's kind of the way it goes. If you have to get to your bug out location on foot or by bicycle, what would that actually mean?
Or hauling a handcart.
Or hauling a handcart, from Texas to
Montana.
I think the availability of gas was a little bit too easy. I think that issue is something that, there's all these cars that are stalled full of gas. I think they kind of got a pass on that they shouldn't have.
Well, first of all, there's anti-siphon devices in most of the filler tubes, right? So you can't just shove a hose down most tubes, and which would necessitate you're going to have poke a hole in the bottom of the tank. in which case, you've got a flat little spot about yay high that you got to get a pan underneath to collect gas, and you got to figure out a way to stop the gas while you empty the pan into something else and do it again. And once you've done that, eventually, when the cars do come back online, or you replace the parts to move them or tow them out of the way, you got a broken gas tank that you got to replace too. So you just compounded whatever problems you had.
Allegedly, right, Ian? You've never tried this before, I take it?
Never, ever.
Okay.
But all I can say is, you're just, it'd be inefficient collection of gas at best, because the siphon hoses that you think you just shove down the tube and call it a day isn't going to happen either.
Yeah. And I mean, I love how all the lead characters in these books have antique vehicles at their disposal. I would love to be that character, but it is what it is. One of the things
Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
No, it's fine. I'm starting a new.
No, I was just going to say, even talking about cars and gas and that, what would happen 20 years from now when the government wants 70-80% of all the cars out there to be electric? Well, now you don't even have gas. So if you find a car that takes gas, where are you going to get the gas from? Because now 70% of the cars out there don't even have gas in them anymore.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
Well, and I mean, one of the things that I'd been thinking about, the book was published in 2009, 12 years have passed since. And I was thinking, while it is incredibly current and topical, I mean, there's a couple of things that, are a smidge dated. But nowadays, when so many things are cloud-based computing, and for, my smart light switch to work, it has to, information has to travel through a server on the far side of the continent and back for me to be able to turn on my lights, let alone something actually important. How much worse would things be today if this were to happen, rather than, the 10 or 15 years ago that the story was set?
Oh, I think it's exponentially gotten worse.
I mean, 100%.
I think they're down to chip sizes, like the circuits are down to the atomic level basically now on circuits. Like Moore's law has almost become a thing of the past, and the simple fact that they can't make circuits much smaller. So I think they're about as susceptible as they're going to get to electrical pulses of some sort.
Right. It's only going to get worse. It's a freaky book.
Yeah. Highly recommended, I would say. But
yes.
On my end, anyways.
Highly recommended. And it'll put your paranoia level. If it's not already up, it'll put it up.
If you're not a prepper before, this book will make you one.
Well,
yes,
and I think every prepper worth his salt, or I won't even say prepper, anybody that's interested in a little bit of self-preservation or maybe preparedness minded, slightly, this should be one of the first books you read, you would think, because it's at least it's not like, zombie apocalypse. It's not, crazy stuff. It's like pretty believable, pretty possible, and
it is. It's
pretty terrifying.
Yeah,
pretty terrifying. So
it certainly got me thinking.
And like you say, it's not one of those real far-fetched, chances are it'll never happen thing. Whether it's an EMP or just a grid collapse, like what happened with the last big blackout there, it's going to happen. And it's not just a matter of an if, it's just a when. It's going to happen.
Oh.
So, some teenager in North Korea is going to do it by cyber attack, or
a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
Don't give him any ideas, gentlemen. Come on now.
With his Fitbit, he's like, take this.
With his Fitbit, oh boy.
Well, in that case, why don't I bring it to the podcast challenge?
Which has nothing to do with Fitbits.
No. Take some time to read this highly regarded fiction. It's terrifying, but worth the read. Read the foreword, the afterword, and just consider that this is an incredibly plausible scenario. It provides a break from the everyday, with the added bonus of providing some motivation to keep your prepping and or filling your prescription for antidepressants.
And insulin.
And insulin,
And
the way to keep it cold.
Yeah.
And after you've read the book, if you haven't already put a Faraday cage up on your priority list, you most likely will after reading this book. So
it's actually kind of funny. I've been meaning to do it for a long time, and I got the metal ammo can sitting right there. I just got to work on it. So
I think I know where my radio is going to live.
I've got some plans to get one built now too, because this book scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
All right, let's move into upcoming events, which has nothing to do with building Faraday boxes.
All right. Well, for now, until Ontario changes their mind yet again, or BC decides on the 15th of June that everything's still super dangerous, there are some Maple Seed events available at mapleseedrifleman.com to learn some basic marksmanship skills. Actually, just good marksmanship skills, should we put it that way. And there's still events limited to 10 people, pretty much across the country available. Get your tickets there. Links in the show notes.
Nice. Cool. We've got some deals.
Yeah, actually, I was worried because we skipped a week that they wouldn't still be on sale, but they are. Cabela's has two different types of Midland family radio service, like FRS walkie-talkies on sale. There's some, relatively cheapies, pretty high-end stuff, like 60 or 40% off on one of them and 25% off the other. And if you don't have a ham license and you want some basic communications to throw in that Faraday cage,
Beat me to it.
Yeah, for after the EMP strikes and to maintain your tactical comms and stuff. Good value for the dollars. I mean, can't hurt.
Yep.
It's better than nothing.
Let's see. There's another deal that would not require a Faraday cage at all.
No, this one is EMP proof. A copy of it's actually an authorized under license copy of a Glock 19 BB gun at Cabela's as well. It is a Glock Model 19 fixed slide BB air pistol for about half price. So it's awesome. It's normally about $140. It's on for $70, and I enjoy it, I must say.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, but
Nothing.
it's good for chasing away like mild predators like ravens and stuff like that, and just just without damaging anything as required. No firearms license required, which is the important part. So if you want to hunt squirrels in case of EMP, instead of wasting 22 bullets, you can use your BBs.
There you go.
Just a thought.
All right, let's move into some shout outs.
You got nobody, Eric?
Nope, not tonight.
Okay, well, speaking of Eric, I've got listener Eric, who is currently binge watching our back catalog. Both CPs,
Nice.
Actually, not just ours, but both CPPs. He's just marathoning through. So I have
That's
to
a
admire.
lot of back episodes.
Yeah, I admire his determined approach to catch up, but it does seem like just a bit of touch of masochism going on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, it's so funny because I got talking with him. File this under Canadian small world stuff. His wife used to be my dental hygienist.
Well then,
I was like, no way, 3,000 miles away dental hygienist? He's like, yep. Wow, okay. So that was kind of funny, actually, more than anything else. But
small world.
yeah.
So I've got not really a shout out, but more of a comment. And it's been a tough week for me with everything going on these days. People's mental health is suffering. I lost a coworker and a friend this week to suicide. If you're suffering or you know someone who is, please reach out and get help. Check on your friends and your family. You never know if that one call might save a life.
That's true.
Wow. I'm sorry to hear, Jeff.
Yeah, sad.
Yeah, Eric knew him as well. So
I did,
it's not just me. There's other people, but it wasn't a good week. So
Sorry, John.
Yeah. So if anyone needs, reach out. Anybody on the panel's happy to chat if you need.
Yeah, always, for sure.
All right. Shall we move into email and iTunes reviews?
Right on. I'll take the first one from
All right.
Darren. And it says, in 1 second after, the main character is John Matheson, and retired colonel, history professor, and man of few words. I'd say he's pretty wordy, but anyway.
He gets wordy.
Yeah. In the early days following the EMP attack, John wishes more had been done about public safety and regrets he didn't do more for his own family. Doxy emote having an extra bag of rice at the time would have helped. But John often sees parallels to the past and present, which translates into him becoming an effective, though reluctant community leader. And as the status quo breaks down, food protection and communication become the most important aspects of daily life. His favorite quote is, "The practices of 100 years ago worked. We have to go back to them." It boils down to carrying capacity of the land, whether it be talking about wildlife or humans or anything else, right? So his question is, what is the duration of an EMP? And how long should you wait before opening a Faraday cage? Thanks, from Darren. All right, Darren. EMP is broken down into 3 parts, appropriately named E1, E2, and E3. I don't know where they got those conventions from, but anyway, E1 lasts nanoseconds. So by the time you say, hey, what just happened? It's done. So it's called the Compton effect, or as I like to remember it, the straight out Compton effect. And basically,
So gangster.
so gangsta. So anyways, It's the only way I can remember it. So it basically affects everything. So it's over quickly. It affects absolutely everything, and nothing from a surge protector onwards is going to help you from that. So that's where the bulk of the damage is done. It moves on to the E2 pulse, which is actually about 1 second, hence 1 second after. No coincidence on the title there. And basically, after that E1 is blown through, what would normally be protected by the E2, what would normally protect against the E2 is what I'm trying to say, has been destroyed by the fact that everything's been burned out. So it might just be like a normal power surge that you would normally run across, but because all the surge protectors circuitry has been burnt out, E1's remove the protections. That's where E2 does even more damage. Now, this is where probably your question comes into play. E3 can last up to hundreds of seconds. So we're talking like, 10 minutes, that type of thing. And that's where the power lines start to melt down, and anything with a long electrical antenna length. So it could be just like a tightly wrapped wire, could be like a power line across the land or anything else. That's where the E3 pulse kind of comes into play and burns out a lot of stuff permanently. So obviously if something like that happened, I wouldn't rush to open my ammo can. And from a paranoid prepper perspective, shall we say, I wouldn't open my ammo can for at least a couple of weeks, maybe, until things start to get really hairy. The reason being, if I was a bad guy and I did the EMP over something like North America, I would do it once. I would wait about a couple of weeks. I'd do it again, because everybody that pulled out their Faraday cages and opened up their radios and had their backups out would get those zapped too. It's kind of like when the suicide bombers in Afghanistan would like let off an explosion, all the paramedics would show up, they let off a second blast because it works. And it's horrible to say, but I would be hesitant to open up my box right off the bat.
That's a good point.
That's my 2 cents worth, anyways.
Well, and with the what is it? The Starfish
Prime.
Starfish Prime.
Yeah.
I mean, all across the Pacific for 8 or 12 hours, they had nothing but static on any of the working radios. I think because the atmosphere was still so charged. Correct?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, everything was pretty much vacuum tube driven, so it didn't burn anything out. But of course, there's a lot of electrical components like capacitors and stuff that would maintain, and the lines themselves would maintain an excess charge that would take a long way to dissipate. Because I don't think they had what they call, it's on the advanced course, Eric. What's that parasitic thing that drains the current out of the capacitors? I just failed the advanced course.
Yep, done. That's it.
Yeah.
Done.
Anyway, so we have built-in circuitry now that actually drains the circuit after a few seconds in order to prevent shocks. That's where the Carrington Event and Starfish Prime didn't have those, and so they maintained static because they couldn't dissipate the excess charge. Anyway,
there you go. Yeah. So good point. Hurry up and wait. Don't open your Faraday box right away.
Yeah.
No.
Because anything worth shooting is worth shooting twice. Same thing with EMPs.
And again, 2 is 1 and 1 is none, right? So maybe you should just have 2 Faraday boxes.
Yeah.
Just throw that out there. Because books made me paranoid. We've got an iTunes review in here. So it says, friendly at the end of the world. It says, gotta love Canadians, smart, resourceful, and unfailingly nice, even as the world falls apart. This is a great show for learning the skills to protect yourself and your family. And of course, you got 5 stars out of it. So appreciate that.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, with that, I will bring episode 119 of the Canadian Prepper podcast to an end. As depressing as the book is, thanks for sticking around and listening to it, or to our review of it anyways. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, or of course, your favorite podcast app. Please help us out. Submit a review. It helps other people find us.
We record the shows live on Facebook and YouTube. If you want an early peek at the shows, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Canadian Prepper Podcast, and click the notifications tab. Gives you alerts when we're about to go live. If you're looking for me, you can find me at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca.
And like Scott, you can also find me as well at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca.
Right on. You can reach Ian directly by emailing me at theislandretreat@gmail.com and on Gab and Odyssey at The Island Retreat. You can also find my Canadian Patriot podcast on iTunes, YouTube, and in the Discord group, Canadian Patriot Podcast. Email us if you want an invite. We can get you on there for sure. There you can find me discussing why government waste in society has me building my Faraday cage.
Oh, boy. So please check out Rapid Survival at rapidsurvival.com. You can get me there on the live chat. You can also email me at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca. So thanks for joining us this evening. Until next time, be prepared, stay safe,
and keep learning.